Welcome back to The Rich Nonprofit. This is straight talk for mission-driven women. I've been having the same conversation a lot lately with clients, with other nonprofit leaders, even with myself. I like to talk to myself. It's about money, specifically how little we pay people who do mission-driven work. And I keep hearing this justification, well, people should want to work here for more than just money. This is meaningful work. Sure, of course it is. But that attitude is killing the nonprofit sector because passion doesn't pay the rent. And when we act like caring about a cause should substitute for fair compensation, we are creating a system that only works for people who can afford to be underpaid. And that's not just unfair, it's bad strategy. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nonprofit employees earn 15 to 20% less than their counterparts in other sectors. And for women and people of color, that gap gets even wider. I'm not going to go there today, but you know my feelings on this. I call this the passion tax, the amount of money you're expected to give up because you chose meaningful work. And nonprofits try and make it sound virtuous sometimes, like accepting less money somehow proves that you care more about the mission. And to me, that's backward thinking. We tell ourselves stories about why this is acceptable. Well, the work is its own reward. We're changing the world. Money isn't everything. But all of these stories ignore basic reality. People need to pay their rent, their mortgage, buy groceries, save for retirement, support their families, pay off student loans. And passion doesn't cover any of these expenses. And I can say this because when I worked for a nonprofit, I was making nothing. I actually had to go get a second job pouring wine, running a tasting room because I couldn't make ends meet. I loved the work I was doing. I loved the people I was serving, and I should have been making a lot more money. So when staff is being underpaid, what it's really costing nonprofits is that they're going to get shorter tenure. People start nonprofit jobs with good intentions, of course. But then, like I had to, you leave when you realize you can't afford to stay. And so as a leader, you're going to end up constantly training new people instead of building expertise. You also get people who have other sources of income. Either they have partners who earn more, they have family wealth, or they're working multiple jobs. And this means that you're systematically excluding people who don't have those advantages. They can't come to work for you because they can't afford it. Also, you get burnout. When people are worried about money, they can't focus fully on their work. When they are working second jobs to make ends meet, they don't have the energy to give their best to your mission or be forward thinking. They are just trying to survive, which means you're going to get less innovation. So when a nonprofit underpays, they often hire people who are less experienced, less qualified. They may care deeply, sure, but they don't have the skills to advance the vision. There could also be reputation problems. Word gets around that your nonprofit doesn't pay well. The best people start looking elsewhere before they even apply to your nonprofit. And this pay equity problem in nonprofits isn't just about money. It's about who gets to do mission-driven work. When you underpay staff, you're creating barriers for people who don't have other sources of financial support. That usually means people from working class backgrounds, first-generation college students, and graduates, people without generational wealth. The sector that talks most about equity and inclusion often operates in ways that exclude the very people it claims to serve. And yes, I did just say that. So if you're serving people from communities that you don't represent or understand, your programs are less likely to be effective. You miss cultural nuances, you overlook important barriers, and you design solutions that you think might work, but they don't actually fit the reality of people's lives. So paying fair wages isn't just an employee issue, it's a programmatic effectiveness issue. And there's another layer to this. Most nonprofit work is done by women, and women's work has always been undervalued. Teaching, social work, counseling, community organizing, victim advocacy, all essential work, all predominantly done by women, and all systematically underpaid. Meanwhile, the few areas of nonprofit work that are male-dominated, like executive leadership, finance, they tend to be paid more competitively. I don't think this is a coincidence. It's a reflection of broader societal patterns that undervalue work associated with women and caregiving. And one of the biggest barriers to fair compensation in nonprofits is the persistent myth that low overhead is a sign of organizational virtue? Donors have been trained to believe that nonprofits should spend as little as possible on administrative costs, like staff salaries, and as much as possible on direct services. But this creates a false choice. Good staff enable better direct services. Experienced, well-compensated employees serve clients more effectively than overworked, underpaid employees. You see this all the time. Yet, nonprofit leaders feel pressure to keep staff costs low to satisfy expectations from donors, from their board, even though they know it's going to hurt staff effectiveness. And when you underpay staff, you create nonprofits that are constantly in crisis. You're always recruiting, you're always behind the eight ball, always training new people, always trying to maintain institutional knowledge as people leave. And that's not just inefficient, it's unsustainable. Now, nonprofits that pay competitively, well, they're going to have lower turnover. They're going to have more experienced staff, and they're going to have better outcomes. They are able to build expertise over time instead of constantly starting over. They're also more attractive to funders because funders want to invest in stable, effective nonprofits. The irony here is that underpaying staff often makes nonprofits less effective at their mission, which makes them less attractive to the very funders they're trying to please by keeping costs low. And you may be thinking, sure, this sounds good, but we don't have the money to pay people more. Well, I'm here to say you can't afford not to pay people fairly. Yes, I just did a double negative there. The cost of constant turnover is enormous. Recruiting, hiring, training, lost productivity, lost relationships. It adds up so quickly. And the cost of poor performance, that can also be enormous. When you have inexperienced or overworked staff, your programs suffer, your outcomes decline, your leadership suffers, and slowly so does your reputation. And all of these costs are higher than the cost of paying people fairly in the first place. So how do you start paying people fairly when your budget is already stretched? First, you make it a priority. Stop treating staff compensation as an afterthought and start treating it as a strategic investment. Second, you build the case for your funders. Show them how competitive compensation leads to better outcomes. Remember the criteria I talked about a couple episodes back? You can bring this criteria to your funders and show them how keeping your staff on long term, even if it's a small staff, is leading to better outcomes. You can demonstrate the cost of turnover and the value of having experienced staff. And third, you look for efficiencies elsewhere. Are there programs that are no longer working? Are there administrative processes that could be streamlined? I know that there are because I find them all the time in nonprofits, and that's what I help my clients with. Are there expenses that don't directly support your mission? Bet you could find those also. And fourth, you start where you can. Maybe you can't give everyone a crazy, big raise immediately, but you can start with your most critical positions. You can commit to annual increases. You can improve benefits, even if you can't immediately increase salaries. You could give more vacation, paid time off. And you know what? Everyone needs that these days. And fifth, you plan strategically. You build compensation improvements into your strategic plan and your funding proposals. You make it part of your organizational development, not as some add on expense later. This issue requires leadership from nonprofit executives, board members, and funders. And executive directors need to stop acting and accepting this status quo and start advocating for their staff. You need to make the case for fair compensation with your board and your funders, period. You need to prioritize staff retention and satisfaction. Board members need to understand that human resources are your most important resources. And they need to understand and support competitive compensation and professional development. And they can help you with that fundraising specifically for organizational capacity. The pay equity problem in nonprofits isn't going to solve itself. It requires intentional action from leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo. And I know that doesn't sound easy, but I have seen clients do it. They look at their staffing needs. We put into their budget what they can afford and what they are going to get funding for. And then they fill those critical positions and they treat their staff well. They pay them well, and it shows because their nonprofit starts to grow. Now, this is going to require all of us to stop buying into the myth that working for a nonprofit means accepting less than you're worth. Your mission deserves to be served by people who are financially stable, professionally valued, and personally supported. And your community deserves programs that are delivered by experienced, skilled, and motivated staff. And you as the leader deserve to be in a sector that values expertise, rewards commitment, and supports the people who are doing this big, important work. If you need to take a look at your nonprofit and rework it so that you can attract and retain top talent through competitive compensation, professional working conditions, we can address this in a Momentum Virtual Strategy Retreat. I can help you design budget, compensation structures, and funding strategies that can support your mission of building not only community, but long-term staff. The link for the Momentum Strategy Retreats is in the show notes. Fair compensation isn't a luxury for nonprofits. It is a necessity because you want to create that lasting impact and you want to keep your staff around. And your mission and vision is so important, and it shouldn't be limited by having to underpay the people who help you make it possible. I will see you next time on The Rich Nonprofit.